Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and holy crap, welcome to Season 8. I haven't had a real job in 8 years, and while that's kind of a dream, I feel like I've worked more over these past 8 years than ever before in my life. And when I think back to my old life, I miss the expense accounts, the parties, shooting the shit with people at the office, and working with athletes, and that's about it, which is crazy, because I've had some awesome jobs in my day, and while I love the security of them, there's nothing like doing your own thing. If you're on the fence about leaving something that you're comfortable with to start something for yourself, don't think about it much longer. Just say fuck it and make it happen. Life is short, it's not fair, and you have to play to have a chance at winning. So don't be scared when it comes to work, because there are plenty of other things in life that are really scary. So take the leap and start your own thing. For me, while starting my own thing is working, it doesn't solve any of my other problems other than what I do for work. And yes, I do love my job, but life, that's a whole nother thing. I mean, 2023 was the worst year ever. My wife beat cancer, and then it came back worse. We totaled one car, which we replaced. We bought a new roof, and the process for that was a total nightmare. We bought a new furnace, and to add insult to injury, I got a terrible case of COVID. And that's just what I can remember off the top of my head. The good news is that I'm going into 2024 with an open mind and hoping for the best. I'm going to start the year off with a sober January, although I will drink a little bit at the WSM trade show that I'm going to at the end of January. And then, we as a family are going to check some things off of Angie's list, which means a trip to Whistler in February and London and Paris in April. I'll also be at the McConkey event at Palisades in March, so the year has potential to be great. What I can't forget to mention is that today is New Year's Eve. It's also my 15th wedding anniversary. I love you, Ange, and I wish you weren't going through this terrible time, but I'm here for you. It's also a big birthday for me, but I'm not much of a birthday guy, so there's no need to say much about that. I will say Happy New Year to everyone and fuck off 2023. And let's start Season 8 and 2024 with a special, positive, amazing soul that's been shaped by surfing and yoga. Gerry Lopez is not the oldest person I've had on my podcast, but he's the most legendary person for sure. The oldest was Wayne Wong, I believe, and while Wayne is an amazing legend, I don't think he's more legendary than Gerry. Everybody knows about Mr. Pipeline, who's now an OG Mount Bachelor snowboarder. This podcast was supposed to happen years ago, but it didn't. And that's great, as I needed a breath of fresh air and wisdom to kick off Season 8, and that's exactly what Gerry Lopez is. Before we get into it, I want to thank Olivia, Carter, and Guy at the Summit at Snoqualmie for always taking care of me. If you're in the Seattle area, check the Summit out. It's the closest and most convenient skiing and snowboarding out there. And even if you're not a skier, they have tubing and night tubing on Tuesday nights, which I assume is just like a rave on tubes at night. It's amazing and I would highly check it out. Actually, I haven't checked it out, but I think you should check it out if you're a tuber. I also want to thank each and every one of you for listening. Please tell your friends about the show. It really does help it grow. And finally, these shows and the history of the sport is not recorded and given out for free if it wasn't for my sponsors. So please listen to their ads, check out their sites, and buy from them. The amazing brands I'm talking about are Elan Skis, Stanley, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Best Day Brewing. Now, let's talk with Gerry Lopez. With this podcast, we're going to hit on some interesting points in your life, but we're not going to be able to hit your whole life in times as you've done so much. So I'm going to start things off with a little bit of a softball of a question, and it's the holiday season. What's the coolest Christmas gift anyone's ever given you?
Oh, boy. I don't know. I guess my wife's giving me my son.
That's a great gift. I mean, I was thinking that you have famous friends. I think you've done stuff with Arnold Schwarzenegger in your lifetime. You've got plenty of surfers who are famous friends. Have anybody gifted you something cool or something special or a memento that you've kept that's just like a really neat thing to have?
Boy, that's a good question, but I can't think of an answer.
That's okay. Well, that was just to kick things off, and it doesn't matter. We'll jump more into the podcast and thinking about you. You've been alive longer than most of my podcast guests. And while age is just a number, you grew up in Hawaii when it wasn't a state. And while you were pretty young then, do you remember that time, and did statehood change your life at all?
No, not really, but that was a really special time, looking back at it all in Hawaii, and a great time to be a child growing up. I'll tell you that. My parents loved the beach, so we spent a lot of time down at Waikiki, and it was pretty magic. That's a very special place. The locals used to refer to pretty much the entire Waikiki area as simply the beach, as if there were no other.
Right.
And that's where we grew up, on the beach.
And does the beach change, though, when it becomes a state and people from the mainland are traveling to the beach to check out your special place?
Not really, because I think the biggest attraction of the beach was the ocean right there. And, the old Hawaiians used to call that area more down in front of the Reef Outrigger Hotel, Kawehewehe. And that was the healing waters where they would go when they felt ill or sick or just not well. And physically, mentally, and most especially spiritually, they felt that immersing themselves in the water there would heal them. And I think they were onto something because, even later on in life, like when stand-up surfing came along and I rediscovered Waikiki, I found that it was still as special out there in the water as it was when I was a child. And I think that was something that was good for the tourists too, because, they came and got to feel a little of that.
I've been to Hawaii a few times as a tourist, and once I was there for work. And I would say the time I was there for work, it was a bunch of ski industry people. And one night there was about 8 of us white guys at a bar, and we really, really stood out. And I'll say it wasn't in a good way. And the local we were with, he was like, dude, be quiet and chill out before you get your asses kicked. Did that kind of attitude towards people happen shortly after statehood? Like, I'm trying to figure out, whenever I've been to Hawaii, I almost feel like I'm in a foreign country and I'm like the outcast there. And I won't say I experienced racism because I don't think it's anything like that, but I definitely was not welcomed, especially when I was with 8 dudes at a bar. And is that kind of what happens when the white man kind of comes over to Hawaii and almost acts like it's their own?
Well, I don't really think it was a white man kind of thing at all. I think it was just there were not many people, and then suddenly there were more and more and more, and things were changing. And, people just have difficulty with change. And there was the old way, and suddenly there was the new way, and you got to adjust or, you kind of get left behind. And a lot of people just weren't ready to adjust. And yeah, that moke action, that was really built up to be more than it actually was. And I don't know.
But I just heard you say the word moke action, and the local that I was with in Hawaii said that if we ever said the word moke, we were like a dead men. Like, do not say that word.
Well, there's the whole local thing over there. And, we all grew up bilingual. Everybody spoke English and spoke Pidgin. And, when you were among your friends, the locals, everybody spoke Pidgin. My father wouldn't allow it at home, but he would always chuckle a little bit, when he would hear it out there. Because both my parents were very well educated. My father was a newspaper man. My mom was a teacher. And they had to deal with the local people quite a bit. And I mean, my mom was a local. She was born in Kauai.
And I would say, a lot of us, I know me in particular, learned the term haole from your cult classic movie, The North Shore. And that movie's what really first taught me about localism. And in the surf world, that's a real thing. And when do you remember first seeing that locals only mentality in the water?
Oh, I guess it was always there a little bit. The guys would come from the mainland and not really understand the way things kind of worked in the lineups, and somebody would have to clue them in. Guys would just shake their heads and go, haole. But, the term haole actually didn't have anything to do with the white man. I mean, it did in a sense, but it comes from an old Hawaiian word of it could have referred to a Hawaiian person, and it meant that ha was, the breath of life. Ole was without the breath. And that was someone who wasn't with it, with the whole Hawaiian way of life. And there were some Hawaiians like that too.
The thing with surfing, or any lifestyle sport for that matter, is, you have to look at the world. It's getting a lot more crowded. And with these sports, when people get hit by the bug and they just have to go, when you have more people, it means more surfers. And is just sheer numbers causing more problems in the water?
Well, there's always going to be people that think that when the lineups are crowded, that there's not going to be enough waves for them because, when it comes right down to it, surfing is a very selfish sport. And when you have that attitude, then you get a little edgy sometimes. And I think every surfer has found himself on either end of that situation, where either they're feeling, oh man, I'm getting uptight because, there's too many guys out here and I'm not getting my waves, or somebody turns on them because they think that this person is getting the waves they should be getting. And the bottom line is, and it takes many, many years to understand and actually even accept this, that there's always another wave coming. Chill out.
Yeah, it's a way to live life, I guess. It's a lesson from the water that you can apply everywhere else in life. And do you look at wave pools as a way to manage crowds and keep surfers happy? Or is that just a way to get more people into surfing and crowd more spots?
Probably both. But the nice thing, because we have a little river wave here in town, and the one thing I noticed right from the beginning was everybody was really happy. And it took me a while to understand why that was. And I finally figured it out, is because everybody knows whose turn it is, when it's time to ride a wave, and everybody takes turns. And that's how surfing used to be until there were more and more people doing it. And I think that the wave pools are going to be a big part of the future of surfing, because there's people that, just what you're speaking about here, that feel like surfing's too crowded for them. Well, they can go to a wave pool and take turns with other people and know whose turn is next, and remove that little edginess, that tension that situation creates.
And when you think about being in the lineup and it being selfish and people snaking people, did the invention of the leash kind of change things, where people actually didn't have to worry about their board taking off anywhere and anybody could drop in on anybody? Did that change the way the game was played?
No, I think that the leash was a great thing, but it also took away that whole having to swim after your board when you blew it. That was always a big part of surfing, that made you want to be a little bit more careful with what you were doing out in the water. And, with the leash on, you could really let it all hang out and not have to worry about swimming after your board.
Back to my whole locals only thing. What's the worst thing that you've seen in the water? Have you seen people actually go to fists?
Oh, yeah. But, in the old days, afterwards, they shake hands and go back out surfing and become friends after that. Nowadays, you can't do that anymore. Otherwise, the guy will go in and call the cops, and you come in, you get arrested and go to jail.
Yeah.
You don't get away with stuff like that anymore.
The funny thing is, you're a snowboarder too, and you've been a snowboarder for a long time, so I'm sure you remember when the parks were snowboard-only parks. And there was a little bit of a ski-snowboard rivalry back then, but I don't really ever remember seeing fights on the mountain. Is that something that's reserved for the water, and why doesn't it happen on the mountain and you do see it in the water? Is it a different kind of person?
No, it's because there's a lot more space in the mountain. You're in pretty tight quarters in the water, and it's easy for tempers to flare and, things to get out of hand when you're face to face like that. On the mountain, you just point your gear downhill and away you go, and it's over.
True. And then I guess in surfing over the years, you've developed into like a Yoda-like figure with a Zen way about the way you carry yourself. And have you ever been one of the people to enforce the locals only way? Or is that not your style at all and you just let it play out with other people?
There's been times where I've had to step in and go, hey, we don't need that out here, you know. Yoga has been something that's been a big part of my life for a long time. And it's been really interesting having had such a long time practice to see how it and surfing have really had like very similar whole evolutionary process here in the West. And I mean, yoga's, of course, been around a very long time, maybe as long as surfing or maybe longer, because apparently surfing has been around that long as well, even though, you know, the Hawaiians never kept any records of it.
You've been practicing yoga since you were 19, so it's like 1968 when you start. And for the most part with yoga, was it looked at as like weird or even hippie back then? Because not as many people were doing it as they are today.
Oh, no, it was total hippie. But I was a hippie, so it was cool in our group. And it was something that was really interesting to me. And, you know, I mean, looking back now, I realize that in a way, yoga kind of chooses you. And it chooses you when it's supposed to, you know, when it's the right time. And I've seen that because there's been a lot of people that I've tried to introduce to yoga that weren't interested. And I figured out that it wasn't the right time for them. And surfing is the same as well. I saw that with my son. He wasn't interested for a long time, and now he is.
And with you getting into yoga, you live in Bend today. And I Googled yoga in Bend, and there are 52 different places in Bend where you could do yoga. But when you came up, yoga wasn't a thing where you could just go to different places and do it. Did you have to learn it from a book and seek out yoga?
I did. Yeah, no, there was the late 60s, there was no yoga studios, or even finding a yoga class was pretty difficult to find. And yeah, it was way different. So we went to the bookstore and, you know, got all the literature we could on it, and that worked.
And being that you are known for your legendary relaxed surf style, and you've been a great surfer for a long time. I mean, you won the Junior Hawaiian Championships at 14, but you start practicing yoga 5 years after that. Does practicing yoga change how your surfing looks at all?
Well, I mean, that was the main reason in the very beginning. I mean, the first time I went to a yoga class, I figured that it would make me a better surfer. So they've both, surfing and yoga for me, have been very closely intertwined and linked together from day one.
Nice. You know, if you look at your life as an athlete, it doesn't play out like the athlete of today. I mean, you're a Hawaiian junior champion, which I mentioned. You're a fixture in the state finals. And today, a kid who has that pedigree would be on a track to being pro. He would have sponsors and all kinds of different stuff going on at 14, 15 years old. But for you, was there even free product back then, or did that not happen in the 60s?
Oh, no. Surfing was absolutely recreation only. You know, even the concept, the idea that someone would pay you to go surfing was absurd.
Right.
And I mean, even well into my professional career, that seemed like a very far-fetched thing, you know. And it was actually the Australians and the South Africans, Peter Townend and Sean and Michael Thompson, who said, yeah, we're going to get people to pay us to go surfing. We were just laughing at them, but they were right. And, you know, you look at what's happened, and it's been kind of crazy. It's how popular surfing has become and how big the sport and the industry has grown. At that time, you know, the only industry of surfing was the few people that were making surfboards.
And now it's just, that's a huge business with everybody needing board shorts and flip-flops, and it is probably the cash king of all the action sports, which is incredible. But back when you were kind of coming up and you were a known entity, it wasn't like you were ushered into this pro career. You went to college, and what I found notable about the time that you went to college was that you went skiing for the first time and you didn't really care for it at all. But where did you go skiing and why didn't you like it?
I went to Mammoth with a friend. I was at Whittier College in Southern California there. And the first time on the skis, I went, oh man, this is like surfing. This is going to take a lifetime to learn. And, it was not a great experience. That was the old days where you had the bindings. They weren't step-in. They were those long leather straps, and you just wrapped them around your foot, to hold your foot onto the ski.
Yeah, totally different sport almost back then with that equipment. Now it's time for my first sponsor break. And for over 75 years, Elan Skis has been building world-class skis in the Slovenian Alps. It's real skiers building skis with the highest quality materials in the world. And I'm not just saying that. Elan is not only known for skis, they also build luxury yachts, so there's no cutting corners on anything. It's all about delivering the best on-mountain experience to skiers all over the world. And while Elan has been killing it in Europe for decades, over the past 10 years, they've been building a cult following here in the States because it's hard not to love a playful ski that's rock solid underfoot and a ski that makes you a better skier. Their award-winning Ripstick line has proven time and again to do this and has a waist width for everyone. But that's not all Elan has to offer. Their brand new Playmaker series in waist widths of 101 and 91 have won all the awards, and they're the perfect tools for landing switch in the park or backcountry. So please do me and yourself a favor. The next time you demo a ski, try Elan and ski what I'm talking about. You can find out more about Elan over at elanskis.com. Next up is where I want you to buy your Elan skis from. Peter Glenn Ski and Sports have been getting people on the snow since 1958. They aren't one of the newer internet companies trying to take over the world with product lines and hotels. They do one thing, get you dialed in with the right gear for your adventure or vacation. They take pride in being the best at that. And whether you're experiencing the best-in-class retail experience or the 5-star rated website based on the almost 13,000 reviews they have, Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, and if you can't get the Peter Glenn experience in person, well, their website offers free shipping on orders over $49, a hassle-free return policy, and they'll price match. That's right. If you find something cheaper at a reputable dealer, contact Peter Glenn, let them know, and they'll match that price. If you like this podcast, please do that for me. To find out more about all things Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, a brand located right down the street from me here in Seattle, and the only brand I trust to keep my drinks hotter and colder than anyone else. Stanley is the best at this. I mean, they invented the category, and they are the all-inclusive brand that wants to outfit everyone's adventures. Stanley isn't going to sell you a $300 cooler. What they are going to do is offer you best-in-class product for a reasonable price. And these days, with ski resorts charging $30 for a burger, there's never been a better time to load up on Stanley's food storage supplies and save your family a lot of money by bringing your home-cooked goodness to the mountains. Whether you like them piping hot or ice cold, Stanley delivers. And while Stanley always offers a code for the best possible discounts to Powell Movement listeners, there won't be a code for the next couple weeks as Stanley has its holiday deals live on its website, and you can save up to 60% off select items. To get the deals and find out more about all things Stanley, head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Surfing's what you're destined to do, and your name starts really carrying weight during the early bonsai pipeline days. And speaking of the equipment, are the innovative board shapes what made surfing that wave possible? Because it seems like people weren't surfing that wave for a while, and then like your generation and crew came in, and that became the spot to go to. And was that all driven by the product?
Absolutely. No, it was completely an equipment failure on the longboards in regards to surfing the pipeline, because that wave's, very fast, very steep, and those old longboards just didn't quite fit that well. And it wasn't until the shortboards started coming out that, we started having any success at that wave. Before that, the popular spot was Sunset Beach, because you could ride anything there. Then when the boards started getting shorter, that was the only thing that really allowed us to have any success at the pipeline.
Speaking of the board shapes, in your movie North Shore, there was Chandler, but in real life, you had Dick Brewer as your Chandler over in Maui. What did that guy teach you, and how important was he to just the evolution of surfing?
Well, I mean, unlike other sporting equipment, say a tennis racket or a golf club or a baseball bat, a surfboard becomes a very personalized piece of equipment specifically designed and built for each individual surfer for not only their size and their ability, but also for their aspirations of what they hope to accomplish in their surfing with the new board. And Brewer had probably the most open mind of any of the other board builders. And he wasn't afraid to try something that was radically different from what anyone else was doing. And that gave him a real step ahead of everyone else because there was that transition period. It was 1967, 68, 69 when the boards went from the longboard to the shortboard, and no one, not a single person, knew what the new shortboards were supposed to look like. It was a period of absolutely total experimentation and trying new things. And Brewer had a lot of feedback because he was making surfboards for a lot of really good surfers, and they were telling him what was working and what wasn't. And it was really a wonderful period in the history of surfing.
And when you say have an open mind, I think about Brewer's shop, Lahaina Surf Designs. And when you think about that, it's LSD. And then you think about the hippie movement that you're a part of back then. And were you full on into the counterculture movement of that time and doing the hallucinogens and smoking weed and doing all that stuff?
Well, I was a hippie.
Okay. Does that go into the water too? I mean, do you take mushrooms and go surfing, and does that enhance everything as well? I mean, I know that's happened on the mountain before, but does that happen in the water as well?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll leave that at that. Are you into the Dead, or what kind of music were you into at that point?
I think our generation's surf music was the blues. I mean, Jimi Hendrix, Red House, Paul Butterfield Blues Band, Janis Joplin, The Doors. And they liked Hawaii too. So they came and, gave a bunch of concerts there, and we got to see them all. And that was kind of our music. The generation before us, the longboard guys, they were into jazz. And, that was great too. But I think our music was more rock and roll and the blues.
And when these bands come over and, fast forward a little bit further in your career, when you're a nationally known dude who's won Pipeline, you won the Masters in 72 and 73, you're in the finals like 4 times, you competed in like 25 years, so everybody knows who you are because of the exposure that's getting. And when the Doors come to Hawaii, and I'm sure they're into surf culture, or at least they think surf culture is cool, do they seek you out? Like, are you able to meet all your heroes when they come play, or is it something that you're just in the crowd?
No, I didn't get to meet them, but Jimi Hendrix actually did come out and get involved with some surfers. I unfortunately missed the time he was there. He came over to Maui and played a little concert at Seabury Hall up on the slopes of Haleakala. But it was his music that was really fueling us. I mean, that was what we were listening to. To this day, whenever I hear Jimi Hendrix Red House, man, it just transports me back to that time period.
That's pretty awesome. It's amazing how music can just strike those memories and bring them right back. And when I say strike those memories, it brings me right into Lightning Bolt, because you created Lightning Bolt surfboards. And what I thought was interesting about you creating a brand, I mean, it makes total sense that you're a big name in the surf world and you've got the new short board that you're surfing, and you might as well start shaping boards and creating boards that'll work well at Pipeline. But it sounds like you gave a lot of boards to your friends, and that almost created the flow marketing program of giving people boards and getting people wanting to buy your brand's board by seeing a good surfer on it. Was that calculated, or did people want boards and you're like, here you go?
Well, that was actually my partner, Jack Shipley's idea, providing boards for, all those visiting good surfers from the other countries or even California and the East Coast, that they would bring their own boards, but they weren't completely or totally suited to the waves on the North Shore whereas the boards we were making were made specifically for those waves, and providing them with our lightning bolt boards. And I don't know if he had that in mind when he started doing it, but all of a sudden, Surfer Magazine would come out and all the pictures had guys riding lightning bolt boards. And that was kind of really what kickstarted the whole lightning bolt thing.
And I think what was supposed to kickstart your career, or at least make you huge, was that first Pipeline Masters in 71. And you should have been there, but the weather looked like shit. What happened? Can you tell us how you missed the first Pipeline Masters?
Oh, I went down to the beach in the morning early, and it was a north wind and the swell was kind of out of the north. So it wasn't at all ideal pipeline conditions. And Corky Carroll was sitting in his car, and he was the only one there. He was reading the newspaper. I think he was reading the sports section. And, I went out and looked at the waves and went, oh boy, I don't think it's going to happen today. And I went back and talked to him, and he goes, yeah, doesn't look good. And, back then nobody had cell phones or anything. Most people didn't even have telephones. And that afternoon, Fred Hemmings came down. He saw a couple of good waves and goes, we're going to have the contest. And, the contest back then was 6 people. That was the whole contest. Yeah. And there was another friend of ours out there surfing, Mike Armstrong, a kid from Laguna Beach, who's a good surfer. And, Hemmings had already figured out that I wasn't around. He goes, who's that out there in the water? And Corky goes, oh, that's Army. And he goes, well, paddle out there and see if he wants to be in the contest. And, he ended up getting second place behind Jeff Hackman. And that was kind of a funny story, and everybody for years thought Corky told me that there wasn't going to be any contest, but that wasn't the case at all. Corky and I were and still are very good friends. And, it just didn't look like it was going to be much of anything to me. And it was my foolish decision, that there wasn't going to be any contest that day.
Well, you end up coming back in 72 and winning it, in 73 and winning it. And like I said, you're in the finals 4 other times. You competed like 25 years. They call you Mr. Pipeline. And in thinking of that contest, or at least in 72 and 73, it was huge for exposure because back then there was like 3 TV channels, ABC, NBC, CBS. There wasn't cable television. So you're either watching surfing, All in the Family, or Mary Tyler Moore. And with 3 choices, does that make you instantly famous when people see you on TV? Like, are you automatically recognized after those contests?
Well, not really. Surfing was still a small sport in the early 70s. I mean, it went outside itself a little bit, but not anything like it is today. And of course, there's no kind of social media. And, the Wide World of Sports telecast was a thing that they did in the wintertime when everybody was cold and kind of miserable, to show a little bit of Hawaii. And, it was a half an hour show and that was it. But I remember going to California sometime after that and somebody asking me for my autograph, and I was like shocked. What do you want that for?
The really cool thing about success is the travel, though, because once you start doing well, you're able to travel all over to surf. And I think you're in search of the perfect wave, or a lot of people are. And you make your way to G-Land, and you had a slice of heaven there for a few years. But I think it's important to describe how from one year to the next, in one season, you were able to learn how bad plastic was for the world. And can you tell like the shocking realization of how the place you loved was almost ruined?
Well, when we first started going to Bali, and then a few years later across the channel there to G-Land in Java, they weren't using plastic for food containers or plastic cups for drinks or plastic bottles for water. When you got bottled water, it was in a glass bottle. And, those early days at G-Land, it was pretty remote. The beaches were, except for maybe some wrecked boats and, which were all made out of wood.
Right.
There wasn't really anything man-made washed up on shore, and I remember the first thing we found was back then we'd only surf during the high tide, so you could paddle out from shore and then, as long as you didn't wait too long, you could paddle back in. over the reef. Then a few years later, the waves were still good when the tide was low, but we didn't have any booties or anything. And, we're trying to figure out, well, how do you walk in and out over the reef? And I discovered this pile of washed in rubber slippers. It was a pretty tall pile, 4 or 5 feet high. And somehow the high tide eddied right in that spot. And that was the only inorganic rubbish that was floating around in that Bali Strait there. And for some reason, that was the one spot it collected, and that was like a treasure trove for us, because we just go through this pile and, they were all washed clean and there weren't matching pairs, but you'd pick out one for your right foot and one for your left foot, and you could walk out across the reef and you stuck them in the back of your shorts. And if they made it through the session, great. If they didn't, well, you go back to the pile and get another set. And, it wasn't until a few years later, because, you'd have to take the ferry to go across from Bali to Java and then back again, that they started selling food and drinks in plastic bags. And man, that was a mess, because, when everybody was done, they just threw them in the water. And, that's kind of how they got rid of their trash. But most of their trash was before plastic. Like if they sold you some food at the ferry crossings, it was wrapped in banana leaves or some kind of organic leaf or something. So you threw that in the water and, it was kind of no big deal.
And now it's just totally trashed?
Well, I mean, kind of like everywhere. Apparently, the stories of the plastic islands floating out at sea, somehow they all kind of gather together, horrifying.
It's disgusting. Yeah, it really is. So your life becomes surfing, traveling, you're running your business, but how do you end up hooking up with John Milius, I think that's how you say his name, and making your first movie?
Well, I got a phone call one day on Maui, and I had no qualms about not answering the phone back then, but for some reason I walked over and picked it up and said hello, and a gal said, "Is this Gerry Lopez?" I said, "Yes, it is." She says, "Will you hold for John Milius?" And I went, "Okay." I didn't know who John was.
Right.
I didn't realize, I had seen a bunch of his movies and really liked them. And then he came on and, said he had a project that he wanted me to be a part of. And that's how we met. And, we made Big Wednesday together and we're friends ever since.
And with Big Wednesday, you play yourself. But to play yourself, do you have to go to acting school to learn how to play yourself in front of a camera?
Not to play myself, but, when he showed me the script to Conan and said, "I want you to play this part of Subotai," and I read the script and went, "Oh man, are you kidding? You got to be an actor to do this. I can't do this." He goes, "Yeah, you'll be fine." And he sent me to Mako's acting school. So I went there and I don't know if I learned anything. I met a whole bunch of great characters and none of us knew how to act. Arnold, Sandal, but John got us through the movie, and afterwards kind of came out okay.
Did you have to take lessons to learn how to wield weapons as well? Because I feel like you have to handle a sword pretty well in that movie.
Well, what John did was he hired he was actually had a karate dojo in Anaheim. His name was Kiyoshi Yamazaki. And, Yamazaki-san was also an expert at the iaido, which is using the Japanese katana. It's the Japanese sword. And so he came and trained with Arnold and Sandal and I and, taught us all these sword katas. Each of us had our own little sword for the movie, but we all learned with the Japanese swords, the katanas. And he and I became great friends, and he was in the Conan movie as well. He was like one of Arnold's instructors in the movie, when Arnold was being groomed to be a pit fighter.
Yep.
So that was the only thing that I had to learn. And, I'd already spent a lot of time with a bow and arrow, and there was one scene where Arnold and I sneak into Thulsa Doom's temple to steal the jewels. And, we wake up the snake and then we have to fight the snake. I got the bow and arrow, and the script called for me to shoot the snake with the bow, and the props guys were trying to figure out how to shoot an arrow down a wire into the snake, and John goes, wait a minute, he knows how to shoot a bow and arrow. And he comes over to me, we're getting ready to shoot the scene. He goes, can you hit that snake from here? And the snake was huge, it was like 3 feet in diameter and it was 15 feet away. And I go, where do you want me to hit it? The right eye or the left eye? He looks at the props guys and goes, see, set up the cameras. We're shooting it. And, I got to shoot the snake. It was really easy. So that was kind of fun.
With Conan, you spend months in Spain, and do you become friendly with Arnold?
Oh, yeah. No, actually, the start of the production kept getting delayed for almost a year. I mean, we were already cast for the parts. And so Arnold and I became really good friends, and spending all that time with Yamazaki with the swords and stuff, just kind of spending a lot of free time together. And because the start kept getting delayed, I mean, Arnold, we thought we'd already be in Spain shooting, and the Mr. Universe event came up, since we weren't going to actually go to Spain for a couple months, and all the other guys that were in the event, all the other bodybuilders knew that Arnold was going to be working on this movie, so they had a chance to win the event. And then Arnold shows up, at the last minute and he won his 7th Mr. Universe title. And, everybody was really angry because, he wasn't supposed to be there.
Oh, that's awesome. Have you ever been skiing or in the mountains with Arnold or gotten him on the water?
I got him on the water a couple of times. Yeah. But I never went skiing with him. No.
It's time for my second round of sponsors. And even before Outdoor Research started sponsoring this podcast, I was rocking a lot of their gear, because nothing else I've used before holds up in the brutal weather that the Pacific Northwest delivers. Everywhere you go in the PNW, you're going to see a ton of OR gear, and that's because the locals know that while other brands may spend a lot more marketing dollars, OR keeps you drier and warmer every time, and that's what it's all about. Well, it's also about looking good, and while OR used to be all about technical mountaineering gear, and they still do that, they've changed a bit. They've hired new designers and partnered with some of the most incredible athletes in ski and snowboard, like backcountry legend Mark Abma, world champion free skier Troy Podmilsack, X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin, and snowboarder Neil Provo, who are making sure the new fits look as good as they perform in the elements. You can check out all things OR over at outdoorresearch.com, and when you check out, enter the code SNOW25, that's all caps and the number 25 with no spaces, and I'm going to save you 25% off your order. Sale items and pro products are excluded. My final sponsor, and one that's a daily driver for me, is Best Day Brewing. They are hands down the best flavors in non-alcoholic beer. That's right, life isn't all about drinking too much. It's all about having your best days ever, and to do that, you need something that won't slow you down. That's where Best Day comes into play. It has all the flavor of your alcoholic beer, but none of the alcohol. Meaning you can have a few, and then you can drive yourself, your kids. You can drive anyone anywhere because you're going to be clear-headed and ready to go. I'm not telling everyone to quit drinking alcohol altogether. Sure, a few beers can be fun, but now, when I drink alcoholic beer, I mix a few Best Days in to make sure that I'm not that guy. You know what I'm talking about. And if you're cutting out alcohol completely, congrats. Finding Best Day will make that easier than ever. And coming in at less than 75 calories, you won't be packing on the pounds like your regular IPAs do. Best Day is brewed for the doers of winter. The skiers, the snowboarders, the snowmobilers, the sled doggers, the ski bladers, the splitboarders, the racers, the snowshoers, and everyone in between. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. And if you can't find it at the store, you can always go to bestdaybrewing.com or find it on Amazon. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. You've had this incredible surf career that creates opportunities, but is it true that Tom Sims is like the guy that tells you about the frozen waves that form on Mount Bachelor, and somehow you transitioned to snowboarding? Is that true?
Well, we had planned this trip here because it was actually Derek Ho and Sonny Garcia that had told me that Mount Bachelor was really a good place to snowboard. And, so Grubby Clark and his wife and Tony and we had come through this area the summer before, and we decided we'd come here for, a couple of weeks in the winter to see what the mountain was like, because we were all kind of learning how to snowboard. And that's when I called Sims up and said, "Hey, we're going to Mount Bachelor. What's that like?" And he goes, "Oh, you're going to love it. There's more waves there than you'll see in the ocean." And I went, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah, wait till you get up there, you'll see." And he was right on, because this is really a windy state. And the wind blows the snow and makes frozen waves. And that's kind of why we like it so much.
Getting into snowboarding, was it like falling in love with surfing all over again? But with snowboarding, you can go every day because the snow's there?
Yeah, and no paddling.
Yeah, true. And what's crazy to me is that you go all in. Was it a tough decision to make Bend home that quick?
No difficulty at all. Like you said, the beauty about snow is that it falls on the ground and it stays there all winter. You can ride it every single day. New snow is great, but old snow is pretty good too.
Yeah, it definitely works. But I mean, thinking about it, you're this warm weather guy who's grown up in Hawaii. Does it take a while to get used to the cold that Oregon has?
Oh, yeah. And, that's how I started this long relationship I've had with Patagonia, because I asked all the guys, "Hey, how do you guys stay warm?" And they go, "Oh, you get Patagonia long underwear." And so I went, "Oh, okay." And I had a friend that knew Yvonne. So we connected, and that's a whole nother story there.
Yeah, I'm sure you've been getting preseason packages every year since then.
Yeah.
And then that first winter that you're living in Oregon, I think that was like the really, really deep winter. And is the attraction to snowboarding that first couple years the feeling of powder? Because I don't really think of you as a groomer or a park guy, but what do I know?
Well, that was the winter of 92, 93, that first winter. And that was one of the biggest ones since then. I mean, the mountain was buried in, we came here right after Christmas, and holy cow, I mean, just the drive up was horrendous from Klamath Falls. It was completely snow covered. And, we got to Bend and went, geez, the whole town was buried. We thought it was like that every year.
Right.
But, the mountain was great, and that was it. We were hooked. We were here 3 days, and we ended up finding a house and buying it and spending pretty much the whole winter here.
What does your snowboard crew develop into? I mean, are you riding with guys like Jaymo and John Calkins and people like that?
Yeah, because, I knew Jaymo since he was a little kid. They used to live in Maui, and his dad had a advertising company, and they had a studio, and I worked with a photographer that worked out of that studio, and we did a lot of shooting. And Jaymo was just like this little kid, and then come here and, find out that he's like the hotshot snowboarder on the mountain.
Yeah, he's a big pro back then.
Yeah. And then, got to meet a lot of the other top snowboarders here, Peter Bush, Alistair Schultz, these guys that were, to me, they were surfing the mountain, and that's how I wanted to ride the snow. So I got to hang with them and really learn how to snowboard.
You're getting to meet all the different riders that are at the mountain through Jaymo and people like that. When I think about snowboarders, a lot of them want to surf when it's not snow season. When guys like Craig Kelly or other big names come into town, do they seek you out and want to meet you? And do you get to hang with some of these legends?
Yeah, Craig and I did quite a few surfing trips and snow trips together. But, that's what was the beauty of snowboarding, was it was just like surfing in a way. And, it was a whole new world for me. And I just embraced it with a bear hug, man. It was cool.
But I'm guessing that you don't totally leave surfing as well, because, I mean, that's what made you who you are. And do you surf in Oregon and in Washington as well? Like, can you handle the cold water too?
Well, I did, but it was kind of cold. I was still back and forth to Hawaii in the beginning because, that's where my surfboard business was, in Maui. And after a month snowboarding here every day, I'd go back there and man, my paddling was down to about 30 or 40%. Had to pay a little bit, but I really liked the whole mountain scene, the snow, and had never done that before in life. So it was new and really, really attractive to me. And that was 30 years ago, over 30 years ago, and we're still here.
Yeah, I mean, that's amazing. You mentioned that you have to pay the price, and in both surfing and in snowboarding, there is definitely paying the price. There's risks and there's injuries. In snowboarding, I think you broke your leg in 2013. What other injuries have you had on the snow?
Oh, just, being stupid and running into rocks and getting bruised up and breaking my ankle was a first for me. I'd never broke anything before and realized that surfing, even in big surf, is quite a bit safer than snowboarding or skiing. I mean, not even including the avalanche danger, which in a ski area like Mount Bachelor is pretty minimal, but still on occasion could happen. But, just like I said, running into rocks or into trees or stuff like that, it's way more dangerous than surfing. And, people go, no, are you kidding? Surfing is way more dangerous, but it's not, especially if you got a surfboard. I mean, you got the greatest flotation device ever designed, and it's tied to you.
Yeah. But, when you think about your surf injuries, they've been kind of weird and interesting and probably a pain in the ass because the one that sounds like the worst is you pierced your colon. How did that happen?
Yeah, that was literally a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Oh, that was just a freak wipeout. The board turned upside down. That was the old single fins, and I just kind of flew up in the air and landed on top of it. And, I mean, looking back, I figured, well, that was some dues I had to pay for all the great waves that the pipeline gave me. And, at the time, I thought it was pretty bad, but afterwards, it actually was time consuming, but pretty easy. And, had an injury like that happened in someplace like G-Land, that would have been it.
Yeah.
But, happening on the North Shore, you get to the hospital, an expert doctor takes care of you. All you got to do is just heal up. Not that big a deal.
And it sounds like you had a bad one as well when you were shaping a board. What happened when you cut your leg with the planer?
Oh, that was just one of the first times when I started shaping. And, I took a few passes and then I was holding the planer and it was still, my finger was off the trigger, but the blades were still spinning. And I held it down with one hand as I was lifting up the board to look at it, and it caught in my shorts and just wrapped up my shorts and kind of sucked it right down to my leg and sliced the front of my quad open, and I went, oh boy.
Oh man.
What a dumb thing to do. So that was more stitches,
How about other surfing injuries? Anything else worth noting?
Many times to the emergency room to get stitches, and a few times even having to stitch myself. But just time out of the water, heal up, go back again, and hopefully learn something from the injury.
Totally. And we can't end this podcast on injuries because I just don't do that. So we need to talk about what you're getting ready for now, and it's your 11th annual Big Wave Challenge. And before we talk about the 11th annual, how does an event like this come to be, and what is it?
Well, at one point, the then marketing director at Mount Bachelor, Andy Goggins, and I were friends, and we happened to be riding up the lift together. And I was pointing out all these features as we were going up the lift that I had named after surf spots. And he's sitting there, and he's got one of those brilliant minds. And he looked over at me and goes, wow, we should have an event. And I went, what do you mean? He goes, yeah, like a surfing event, because that's like a surf spot. And I went, that's an idea. And so we went and we talked to the marketing manager then, Tom Lomax, who was also a surfer. And he thought about it and went, nah, it's a good idea, but the best way to have this event is use the machines, make waves out of snow, and have your event right down here on the lower mountain. And we went, okay. And that was kind of the beginning of it, the Big Wave Challenge. And it's evolved over the years. We lost a few years with COVID, but I guess it's been 13 years now, and this will be the 11th one. So we make waves out of snow and have a surf contest.
And there's nothing like this anywhere else. Do you get a lot of pros coming from all over the world to check this thing out and be a part of it? Or is it more of a Northwest rider type thing?
Yeah, I mean, every once in a while, some of the hotshots will come, but mostly it's just the locals. And then, we try and get my surfer friends to come, and we've had quite a few of them come over the years and have had a good time.
Thinking about bringing some of your surfer friends out to check it out, think about one of your surfer friends that really hasn't snowboarded much and they're a super talented athlete on the water. What's the learning process for them on a snowboard? Because for most people, it's like 2-3 days of falling a whole lot and they pick it up. But with a super talented athlete like some of your friends, do they pick it up really quickly?
Well, I brought a team rider up here and we parked him on the baby chair. And after about 3 runs on Pine Martin, we came back down. He was waiting at the bottom. And I go, what's up? You okay? And he goes, yeah, I want to go up this lift. And I go, well, how many runs did you have on that one? He goes, too many. It's kind of boring. And basically, he learned to snowboard in about 30 minutes.
That's crazy.
He's come out to the Big Wave Challenge a few times, but he was something else. I mean, that was shocking how quick he learned.
Who was that?
His name was Eric Toda, and he was one of my surf team riders. He ended up becoming a great surfboard builder in his own right. Yeah, I've never seen anybody learn how to snowboard as quick as he did.
That's insane, man. 30 minutes is crazy. So what are the details for the contest this year? What are the dates? And if you have them off the top of your head, if you don't, not a big deal.
I think it's about March 22nd. That was the date that was open with the mountain. Generally, we like to have it in the springtime, but the mountain has so many events these days that, the only slot we got was mid-March. And, we got the men's, the older men's, the Makulis, the Kanis, the Wahine division, the women's, the Keikis, the 16 and under division, and then we have the pro surfer division as well. It's a jam type format, so when each of the group goes, you can go take as many runs as you want. And we choose the top 3 people in each division, but we also have quite a few special awards, for like the best cutback or the best bottom turn, the best tube ride.
That's pretty cool.
The most aloha.
Sick.
Yeah.
Well,
fun event.
Yeah. Well, at this point, it's time for something that I call inappropriate questions. And I tried to get someone that to ask 3 questions, but I don't know you that well, and I don't know that many people that do know you. So I wasn't able to get somebody to ask you 3 inappropriate questions, because that's what I usually do. So I'm going to ask you the 3 inappropriate questions, and I'm pretty good at coming up with some. So I'm going to give you my first inappropriate question. Surfing is a sport where you're on beaches. There are crowds. You're in bathing suits. You guys are the rock stars. And in the 80s and 90s, what was the groupie situation like?
The groupie situation?
Yeah, I mean, were the girls on the beach just waiting for the surfers to come out of the water?
I guess so. I had a girlfriend, though.
Okay.
Who later became my wife, so I was on a short leash.
So you saw other people take advantage of that?
Oh, I'm sure they did. From the beginning, the surf parties were always the happening thing. And I remember from the beginning, girls seemed to like surfers. There was something appealing about somebody that spent a lot of time in the water, was all tan and in good shape.
Yeah, it sounds like a recipe for success with the ladies. Well, I will jump into question number 2. And with that one, you were in the cult classic, the most iconic surf movie of my life, I feel like, in North Shore. There's so many different things we could talk about within that movie. But thinking about after the shoots, what was the craziest party or craziest thing that happened with the cast and crew? Because there were a ton of personalities, pro surfers that were in that movie. Did it get wild after the shoots?
They had that one party scene, and it actually ended up becoming a real party, even though they were filming it. But I thought the funniest part was, they were trying to come up with a character someone to play the part of Lance Burkhart, the kind of dickhead pro surfer
Yeah.
in the film. And I went, oh, Laird would be perfect for that part. And I called him up one morning. I go, hey, because he was over on Maui. I go, fly over here. And he goes, what for? And I go, I think I can get you a part in a movie. He goes, really? Okay. So he flew over. I went and picked him up. You know, we drove out, and producer Randall Kleiser and the director Bill Phelps were staying at a house right on the North Shore at Leftovers. And so they knew I was going to come by that morning. And so I said, okay, we're going to go meet the producer and director. Take off your shirt. He goes, what? I go, take off your shirt. He goes, what for? I go, just take off your shirt. He shakes his head and he takes off his shirt. We walk in and they look up and I go, this is Laird. And they go, he's perfect.
They just needed to see him and that was it?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. All right. Your final inappropriate question. Outside of surfing, there was your Hollywood life. And in the 80s, I'm guessing there were parties, and I've seen movies of silver bowls of drugs and total decadence. Did you ever see any of those crazy Hollywood parties, and did you go?
Yep. And that's why I haven't had a drink since then.
Wow. Just from those crazy days? So you've been sober since what? Since the 80s?
1977.
Dang, that's crazy. Good for you.
Yeah. It's a tough business because, you know, you get paid a whole lot of money and you spend a whole lot of time sitting around. And I think that's the tough part about it. You know, a lot of the actors, they can fall into that hole. And one of them, a good friend of mine, Jan Michael Vincent, did. It was pretty sad to see.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will say that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And you've been part of so many firsts. Between finding the tube at Pipeline, to adventuring to find first surf spots all over the world that became iconic, to the early days of snowboarding, to toe-in surfing. You've been there for the beginnings of windsurfing, and you're defined by your effortless signature style. And I've had a ton of legends on this show, but you are probably the most legendary dude that's ever been on this podcast. You're also easily the most approachable because you're willing to answer any question, and you're super nice. And I thank you for being so cool, and I thank you for your time.
Mike, it's been a pleasure. Good to talk to you. I wish we could have talked about yoga some more, but maybe we'll save that for another time because I think the world is at a place where it needs yoga more than ever.
So that was Time with Gerry Lopez, and this is another one where I stepped out of my comfort zone. And really, when I do this, talk to an athlete that's outside of what I'm familiar with, I always get a unique and different interview. That's what I try to do with all my guests, is make the interview something unexpected and something they're stoked on. Gerry and I spoke after the podcast, and it sounded like he had a lot of fun recording the podcast, and that's important. When I'm dealing with living legends like Gerry Lopez, the last thing I want to do is waste theirs and your time by repeating old stories and keeping it boring. So I focus on things like Arnold and localism to get the unique stuff out, and I hope you like that route, and I'm guessing you do because you come back week after week, and I appreciate you for that. So I hope you review me wherever you listen to me, and I thank you for tuning in each week. You and my sponsors are why I'm able to keep this show going. So thank you again, and thanks to Stanley, Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elan Skis, and Best Day Brewing for continuing to support the documentation of the history of these sports. Have a great week, everyone.